In the 1950s and 60s, rapid urban development and urban renewal were revolutionizing communities across America. Honolulu was no different, but this threatened areas housing historic architecture and essential community institutions. Nancy Bannick, a revolutionary journalist and Honolulu resident, reacted to this through advocacy. She pushed to reform the systems that threatened the culture of Honolulu throughout the late 20th century. Although she faced bureaucratic and legislative pushback, she led a counter-revolution against urban renewal. Her activism and collaboration prompted a further preservation movement to save communities in Hawaii, which led to more political action. As Hawaii became a hub for international trade and commerce in the 19th century, Honolulu Harbor and the adjacent areas on Oahu grew into thriving urban centers where immigrants created communities. This spawned diverse areas with cultural traditions and family-owned small businesses. While some of these buildings were old, Victorian, Chinese, Japanese, and other architectural styles contributed to a vibrant atmosphere. After World War II, the United States initiated building projects using federal funds and policies, including highways and high-rises for transportation and housing. This was met with excitement in cities, including Honolulu, as people desired better conditions and distinctions between residential and business districts. Urban renewal was defined as a plan to revitalize cities by clearing impoverished areas, relocating people, and constructing new infrastructure to create economic prosperity. The idea was, out with the old and in with the new. The action taken to complete this was revolutionary in changing the ways people lived. It often led to the creation of different, wealthier communities that pushed the original residents of a racial minority to worse areas, which was seen prominently in New York and Washington, D.C. A D.C. newspaper brought up how urban renewal was described as an overall program to upgrade broad areas through conservation and rehabilitation, with bulldozer surgery applied only to structures that are literally beyond repair, or where a non-conforming use creates a nuisance. Urban renewal projects on Oahu were carried out with government funds by the Honolulu Redevelopment Agency, or HRA, established in 1949. In 1959, Hawaii attained statehood after being a U.S. territory since 1898, which contributed to the business and governmental desire to follow national trends of modernizing. The Queen Emma district was first to be redeveloped by the HRA. Beginning in 1962, the oldest slums in Honolulu were cleared out to make way for high-rises on the Queen Emma block. The Kukui district was next. The HRA used federal funds to pay residents the value of the property they were forced out of, but this didn't cover businesses and other community institutions, like churches and social centers that were being destroyed. In 1950, Nancy Bannick moved to Hawaii to write for the Sunset magazine after graduating from Stanford University with a degree in journalism. She later got a job at the Star Bulletin, where she reported on women-centered and social matters. It was in these roles that Bannick noticed the development plans. As a curious journalist, she began to investigate and ask questions. In 1963, she gave her research on the Kukui area to the HRA so it could be incorporated into the development plans, which apparently buried it, according to Bannick, as there was no response. She wrote articles for the Honolulu Advertiser on how development was destroying the lives of people connected to the buildings and community. That same year, a 1-hour-long TV special on urban renewal headed by Bannick saved the Toyo Theater and moved the Izumo Taisha Kyo Mission, both prominent centers in the Japanese community. She said, "Somehow we have managed to neglect our cultural heritage. The buildings are almost all we have at the moment to symbolize this." The public rallied around Bannick and the idea of preservation through community groups and volunteer work because of her articles. Numerous letters to the editor of the Star Bulletin were sent in support, as well as individual letters of praise to her. This marks the beginning of her counter-revolution against urban renewal. One of Bannick's criticisms of the HRA was that communities often didn't have any say in or invitation to the decision-making process. In response to her articles and activism, the HRA fired back. Lee Mace, manager of the HRA, responded to her criticism with 3 articles on the supposed benefits of urban renewal, claiming her statements require undeserved attention. People thought her research and recommendations were absurd and misinformed. As a determined, dedicated crusader, Bannick didn't let this stop her. She continued making her and others' voices heard, drawing increased focus to the issue of urban renewal. In 1965, the mayor asked Bannick to chair the newly organized Historic Buildings Task Force formed in conjunction with the Historic Hawaii Foundation, which she was a charter member of. The task force consisted of volunteers with experience in historical preservation and enlisted University of Hawaii students to survey buildings. It was intended to reform development processes and make recommendations. The criteria for preservation included community importance and architectural value. It was adopted by the Honolulu City Council and Administration. Bannick and the task force pushed the city to establish historic districts within Chinatown to protect them from intensive new development. She testified many times to stop urban renewal projects, one time being the only one, saying how they will be out of character.
It was just, you just don't do away with all that and put up a bunch of 20th century high-rise buildings or something like that. It just destroys everything.
She corresponded regularly with politicians such as Mayor Frank Fozzie and Governor John Waihe'e to advocate for preserving buildings. The year Mayor Fozzie was elected, she worked with the Hawaiian Historical Society to publish Old Honolulu, a guide to Oahu's historic buildings, which set a precedent for the task force's work. The task force also worked with the city planning department to update zoning codes to ensure landmarks could be protected, also running community education and engagement initiatives. The work wasn't just confined to Honolulu. The task force also pointed out buildings in Waipahu, Haleiwa, Waialua, and other towns. Bannick made it clear she wasn't completely against urban renewal and reiterated to critics that the task force is not fighting to block progress by preserving every old picturesque building on Oahu. She wasn't able to save everything, and the Historic Hawaii Foundation relied on limited funding and advertisements as a nonprofit. In 1965, preservationists wanted to save the old courthouse that served as the Hawaiian Kingdom's legislature and judiciary before being sold to the development company AmFac. Even though Bannick and the task force proposed multiple plans to save the building, it was demolished in 1968 to make room for an office complex. Bricks from the building and sidewalk were preserved. Bannick said, "It's a shame that one of the most historical buildings in Honolulu would be destroyed." Hawaii's land use law was created in 1961 and later amended, with its main goals being to classify land to implement regulations and policies. This was done through governmental planning and organizations, many of which Bannick was a major part of. A National Land Use Policy Act that took inspiration from Hawaii's land use law and policy management was introduced to Congress in 1970, but it failed to pass. However, the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, was signed into law that same year. This proved that the federal government, like Hawaii, now took preservation and land management seriously. The counter-revolution in documentation and advocacy that Bannick started picked up. Over the next few years, she was joined by other organizations that reacted against urban renewal, including Save Our Surf, which protested development near popular surfing spots. She inspired other news articles about the importance of threatened areas. In the 1980s, there were wins and losses. The boundaries of Honolulu and Chinatown were developed, although the latter was smaller than before due to encroaching development. A movement to restore the Hawaii Theater started. However, Bannick's fight to save the Toyo Theater was lost as it was demolished to develop a mortuary and apartment buildings. The Hawaii Culture and Arts District was created to map out and support small businesses. The Historic Hawaii Foundation is still working on preservation through local engagement and policy, such as publishing research on historic areas and advocating tax exemptions for historic properties. Nancy Bannick was given many awards that honor her role in communities, including some on a global scale. Urban development has risen as gentrification and urbanization, and it faces controversy in Hawaii. However, public action has made the process more inclusive, and people have increasingly realized the importance of preserving significant community areas. Nancy Bannick's revolutionary impact and legacy have persisted just like her, contributing to Hawaii's unique culture of preservation and adaptation.